how
the position of Native Indians in the United States is dire.
they
You've heard of the
died.
Trail of Tears?
They
I
died.
know.
People being
We
moved
cooperated.
1,000 miles from their homelands
Their
and
position was not
placed in
dire at all.
squalid,
They were respected to an incredible
useless
extent.
land. Come on.
The problem was that their children died from disease. Their ability to actually live in North America was basically completely abrogated by the introduction of all these new world diseases. It meant that children basically died. So you had a lot of places where for example, on Northeast Islands, where you had Native Indian populations that lasted for quite a long time into the 1800s because they weren't slaughtered. The reality was that just every generation there were less and less and less of them until there were none left. That was what happened. Was that disease culled these populations, and of course, before the colonists even arrived, the vast majority of the Indians on the continent were wiped out by disease.
Dude,
But
this is completely retarded. This is completely retarded, Kyle.
You fight alongside them in
they
war.
Are the other. They did not have the right to vote. They were not one of us.
They were treaties, incredibly generous treaties.
No,
granted.
They were treaties. They were a different nation.
Nation. They were granted incredibly generous treaties, and when they abided by the peace terms, they were given everything that they were promised.
This is how we treat other peoples.
Brundlefly, you have an ahistorical and nonsensical view of how white people treated other people. You have a view that is essentially leftist slander of white people.
No votes. Blacks didn't have the right to vote.
Okay. No votes. That in no way encompasses the view that you have described of yourself.
The last 50 years.
Look at the Brundlefly. Look at the way Brundlefly. Look at how the look at how the pre-war South regarded their way of life, which was intimately connected with their slaves. It wasn't the case that they described incredible disgust when faced with the prospect of engaging in of having these people alongside them. The reality was that they were able to get along after a fashion, and they didn't look. If the fact had been that when white people looked at those black people, they felt absolute disgust and horror, then there would never have been this institution in the first place. There would never have been this mass importation of these people in the first place. Your views are out of line with how white people have felt about other races forever.
You're absolutely wrong. Theodore Roosevelt said, "I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are." Yeah, there's the love that you're speaking of. Kyle, you were being entirely reasonable, it seemed to me, until this discussion of Indians got started. And then your materialism rose up and got completely out of control. When you have the President of the United States, not just any president, but a progressive president of the United States, saying that 9 out of 10 Indians are better off dead, that gives you an idea of the hatred, the ancestral hatred that the American people have had for Native Indians.
Nonsense. If that was the overall view, then it would have been perfectly easy to exterminate every last one of them very early on in the process. It would have been very, very easy to kill every last one of them if that was what they wanted to do. That's not what they wanted to do. That's why there are still Native Americans on reservations today.
So anything short of genocide is generosity in your view. That's
Kevin,
quite revealing.
They could have killed all of them really easily if they hated them. They could have killed all of them very easily if they hated them. They didn't kill all of them, and they also granted them autonomous regions ridiculously in the midst of their conquered territory, which extend to this day. So they've been incredibly generous with him, and overall have gotten along with him. Like, despite the fact that the other side was constantly fighting them, was constantly, at every chance that they got, running raids on neighboring white places. Despite that, they survived because of the incredible generosity, and because overall white people don't hate other people of other races when they look at them, and that's also why white.
Well, so Kyle, then, when the minorities take over the United States, and you are consigned to a reservation, a barren reservation, then you can thank your conquerors for their generosity.
Kevin, the future of the United States, the future of the U.S., at worst, is a Brazilian future, right? And that's not a future where white people are completely subjugated.
What about South Africa? Is that a possibility?
South Africa is a completely different demographic
why
situation,
is that not
completely different historical situation.
Would that be worse than Brazil?
Yeah.
Why is that not possible?
Because of completely different demographics. I mean, this is why an understanding of racial differences is important, because you can see what's just a nonsensical idea. A country that's the vast majority Sub-Saharan African is completely different than a country that's part white, part Latino, part Sub-Saharan African.
South Africa is where whites. There is a white minority who has lost political power, whereas Brazil has managed to sort of melt, blur the lines enough, and white people still hold economic and political power in Brazil.
If you think that that's the salient difference, then you have no idea about racial differences.
Oh my God! What, the IQ difference?
Who looks at people and looks at races as counters to be pushed about on a board?
Yeah, I mean, a quantitative understanding of racial differences leads to measured conclusions.
Dude, you need to get
and an unquantified understanding of vague and silly and I don't know, romantic notion of racial differences leads to just nonsensical understandings of history.
Dude, white people, I wonder, in Brazil, are white people talked about as white devils? Are they demonized as whites in Brazil?
Brazil lately has been enacting a lot of affirmative action, a lot of very harsh affirmative action measures. So leftism has come to Brazil in a big way. Bolsonaro is in large part a response to that. So yeah, there are Brazilian leftists who talk about whites as oppressors. Right. There are Brazilian leftists who support affirmative action. And yeah, I don't think that the Brazilian political situation.
Worst case, it could get worse. It could get worse for all of us.
Oh yeah,
we could all become South Africa. Right, because
South
Africa is the white devil loses his political power.
No, South Africa is a country that's vast majority Sub-Saharan African, and countries that are vast majority Sub-Saharan African have certain.
I wonder, what is the admixture in Brazil? How much African DNA is in Brazil? There's a lot.
Okay, well let's check it. It won't take that long.
What exactly the mass of non-whites are is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It'd be like, well, whether they're Somalians or Ghanaians, I mean, that makes a huge difference because 3 IQ points, the trajectory of your society is so much different. Give me a break, dude. They ain't white people.
Yeah, Brundle, you're making fun of understanding racial differences.
It's not a place I want to live, no matter what.
Yeah, Brundle, you're making fun of understanding racial differences.
Why don't you explain Northern Ireland, where essentially you have two groups of people. You have a Protestant majority, about 2/3 of the population, which derives from Scotland. And then you have the Irish minority, which, of course, derives from Ireland. And, of course, you can almost throw a stone from Ireland to Scotland. And these people have fought tremendous wars and terrorism over decades. These are just relatively small differences. And then you want to talk about the difference between, say, white and black people. I think you're the one who doesn't understand racial differences.
Kevin,
the people of Ireland had roughly a quarter of their country stolen from them, and that happened 400 years ago or so, and they still haven't gotten over it. How about that? I mentioned this word atavism, which is something that you do not seem to understand. It's not that you don't understand it; it's that it stands so far outside your process of thinking that you have deemed it to be irrelevant.
Would you prefer to live in South America than Europe?
Certainly not.
Okay. So why? What about?
But the differences are limited. My opinion is measured. It's not infinitely worse to be in South America than it is to be in Europe. It's measurably worse. You have to have quantifiable measures. If you resign to this sort of spiritual understanding, then you're setting yourself.
Give me the value.
You're setting yourself against
6.2. What's your value? What's
you would look at measures
the hard and fast
economy, crime rate.
Okay,
and,
so you're making value judgments. You're making from first principles. You're making presuppositions about what is good, what is not, based on your own perspective. I mean, look, dude, it's all
absolutely
perspective based.
I want to bring back the conversation before it got derailed by Kyle's curious views on American history. That Brundtle's problem is this, as I see it. If you want to be a revolutionary, you have to live with the consequences. You have to accept that standing so far outside the mainstream means that you are going to be persecuted for it.
Look, dude, I believe what I believe, and I'm here to be honest about what I think. I'm not going to lie to myself to be more acceptable. I mean, it pains me. You're like, why, you bring anguish upon yourself. Yes, it is painful that what I see as the truth is so far outside of what other people see. The reason I come on YouTube is basically to commiserate with people that understand where I'm coming from. Also, maybe to convince, spread my ideas on a certain level to other people that don't totally agree, try to persuade, and make the little dent on the world that I can. But I'm not about to make some pragmatic decision about what to believe based on what would most benefit me. If that was the case, I would be paying all kinds of lip service to the homosexual multicultural agenda. But I just can't
okay, but this
it.
is significant that you mentioned this, Brundlefly, because there is an in-group and an out-group strategy. Many groups use this. The Jews do, the homosexuals do, to this day. Look at Milo. Milo's career was wrecked because he said essentially the same thing that George Takei had said about homosexuals and abuse and being recruited. Okay. The homosexuals have been very successful by to the out group saying, oh, we're good liberals and we only want equality and all that. And, among themselves, they speak very differently about their practices and about their political goals. And this is what successful movements do. You cannot expect the in-group to be accepted by the out-group without mediation.
Oh, I completely agree, Kevin. And I just want to be clear. I consider this conversation to be pretty much an in-group conversation, right? Like the people listening are largely in agreement on some fundamentals, or at least willing to engage in taboo conversation, right? This is not how I talk with people in my normal life. Like, even if I'm talking a political conversation with somebody who's even right of center, there is a mediated position that I put out. It's like, so I absolutely agree with you, Kevin. I mean, and I guess so. So Kyle, one thing you have to understand is what you hear when you hear me is what I really think, and I think you would be surprised about what a lot of people really think, that they're not willing to say in a public setting, particularly on television. Right? Like, no one on television would sound like me. I mean, the fact that Tucker gets as close as he does, and, probably even we get even closer to what he really thinks when he calls into that radio show. I mean, what do you think he says to his buddies when he's been drinking?
Brundle,
is Tucker Carlson just how much money does he have? How's he doing?
I think that in 10 years, if we have a private conversation that you're sure is private and it's not going to be leaked, in 10 years, you're going to have very different opinions. I don't think that the opinions that you have are as stable as you think that they are, and I don't think that they're...
I think the same is true of you. The same is true of you.
Yeah,
the same is true of you.
I actually
because
hope
I was 25.
The FTO to actually do it, to actually have this conversation in 10 years. I really hope that we do have that FTO and we can keep in contact.
I think we do. I hope we do too. But I think, here's the thing, dude. I think you're probably right. As I'm sure Kevin can attest, probably every decade things have changed for him. It's true for all of us. It's true for all of us. It's true for you too. You're just out of school. I had a lot of the same opinions you did out of school. And also that same self-assuredness. So I look forward to that conversation a decade hence. But
less than, I just point, to go what you just said, less than 20 years ago, I was rather well paid expressing political views which would liable to have me arrested now. That's what's changed in my country, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, the stuff that I wrote for Alberta Report, it was not in everything that I thought, but let's say that it was 80% that I thought. And Alberta Report was considered to be, a right-wing magazine, but it existed, and there were no attempts to. It had trouble with, human rights boards and whatever. But now, and I'm not joking, it's not just that. I couldn't get hired in Canada to express political views. It's just that, if I did, I would likely be arrested for saying what I had said less than 20 years ago.